Well, that's sort of a theme, sort of, a little bit. You know? I mean, make sure everything's... How's the sound? Does the sound working all right? We have some audio. I had actually spent a couple hours working on the audio, making sure it was okay. It was perfect because you know, it's we live in this 2024. I mean, we're not living in 1984. Well, at least not literally in 1954. You know, it's 2024, so we have all these issues. So this is, of course, the aesthetic series, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. So on our last aesthetic series, as you know, I talked about one thing, and that was the movie 10. And I love doing that. I actually kind of, you know, if it were up to me, I could see doing the type of show. I'm not going to do a show like this, but it would be a worthy endeavor to have a show. Every single episode of the show would just be one object, like one novel, one poem, not even a person, not even a movement. I mean, I'd be tempted to say the French New Wave. No, the episode would just have just Jacques Rivette, not Truffaut. Don't mention Chabrol. Just Rivette, and it was just single people, single books, and so it was great to do Blake Edwards 10, talk about a single movie. And then shows like today, which is number 11, that was 10, so we're in number 11, which is a little bit of a potpourri, you know. And we're going to go back to Susan Sontag initially, and I want to say a couple of things because a lot's going on in the world, of course, and in my life. Look at all this stuff. Too much, right? I actually found out yesterday, so I went to Interlochen Arts Academy in the mid-'80s, and I discovered yesterday that one of my favorite professors, not only there, but of all time, and a terrific writer, just a terrific master of the short story, as good as Alice Munro in quality. I studied with him. His name was Jack Driscoll, and he passed at the age of 78. And I found out from one of these alumni type of you know, he's not so famous as to get a New York Times obituary. He's not a Marilyn Robinson, you know, for example. I mean, Marilyn Robinson, of course, hopefully has another book in her. One more books in her, or, you know, these are examples. Or Joyce Carol, so he's not a big name. But he was big to me, and I actually never got to study writing with the guy, at least not explicitly. So I had to write essays. I studied literature with him. And his class, this is a different era. His class was called, and he invented this class himself, Man's Search for Meaning. And in that class of Jack Driscoll, we read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I'm trying to remember now. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. And Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Three really great selection, right? And you know, it's funny, when you're studying with a great writer or a person that does fiction, you know, he's not just an English teacher, you know, he's a writer. It's different than studying with somebody else, because I actually studied with James Wood at Harvard. So Wood, of course, is a very famous critic, book critic. And he's not, I think he wrote one novel, I read half of his novels some years back, but he's not primarily, he's a prose stylist in criticism, but he's not a short story writer, and he's not a novelist. So you're reading Ken Kesey, I'm reading these great books, I'm reading it with somebody that does the thing. And, you know, this was in Michigan, and he's kind of a Michigan author. And so I was going to look at all these old yearbooks, so I'm going to read some from Style. I'm going to get to the Style in a second. I don't know whether I should do that first or not, but I'm going to do one thing at a time because I want to play a little of Jack Driscoll talking about. This is just an audio clip I found from 2 years ago. So at the end of the guy's life, pancreatic, and I mean, it's just talking about. I'm not going to play the whole things from Literary Hub, but just going in and Lock and Arts Academy, sitting in that class and talking about those 3 novels was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And it wasn't piano, it wasn't music class, it was just these books and Jack Driscoll. So this is Jack Driscoll talking, and from
he doesn't say when asked, but I think the question is whose idea when the authorities show up. He asks the narrator whose idea was this, and the narrator doesn't deny that it was his, though it wasn't. So exactly. That's Raymond Carver says, fiction that matters is about people. It's about a dog jumping through the ice, swimming into another shanty, but it's about these characters. It's about these kids. And now they have to carry in the aftermath of this tragedy, they have to move forward. So that's with them for a lifetime. And that's what the story is really about. And it's a story about love.
So this episode is brought to you by.
That's just Tim talking about what the story's about. We don't know the context. It's taken out. It's in medias res there. Jack Driscoll. His most famous work, I think, is 20 Stories, and then there's the Goat. Is it the Goatfish? That's another collection I recommend of his. And here talking about Jack Driscoll with other people and studying with him makes me want to do a whole episode just on this kind of stuff. But that's isn't what I planned. I didn't plan that. I was going to talk about style. But what's the first thing Jack Driscoll talks about? Very opening of this interview. The first word he mentions is style.
So more than 400. My track record is pretty stellar. And please beat the odds of having or listening.
Where are we here?
And when I read back over it now, I do think maybe with a story or two, I did choose well enough to give that whole a sense of a lifetime of writing short stories where they began. The best of each of these.
Well, instead of hearing him talk, the transcript here. So he says, first thing he says, he talked about voice, of course. Delivery system. So he says here, voice is a delivery system. Or as David Roderick said, it's not the tale that pleases, it's the telling. And that style. See, I've been saying all along, and D.H. Lawrence says the same things. D.H. Lawrence says that that the tale is everything and the teller is nothing. I think that so basically the how is more important than the what. And that's all style. Whether sentences are short or long, whether there's subordinate clauses or not, whether the voice is a regular person on the street or whether the voice is an educated, hyper-educated, omniscient narrator. And this is just talking about prose. How are the paragraphs? So it's that's why I like he says the telling. He's interested in the telling. And so now we're gonna go from fiction to nonfiction, but as much as I do love fiction, I think fiction now is underrated, actually. Because I think in a way, and also creative nonfiction It's good, but I think it too might be overrated because I think it takes away from pure invention of characters and old-fashioned novels and stories. I'm just saying right now I'm in that mood because Jack has passed, so I'm gonna be waving a flag for what he did a little bit, and I'm gonna be waving a flag for a little bit for Marilyn Robinson, Joyce Carol Oates, Raymond Carver, and John Updike. I was gonna read some Updike because that's kind of the mood I'm in, you know. And but the thing of it is that even though I feel all of that is underrated, strangely enough. I mean, this guy didn't get a New York Times obituary. He's just a guy teaching in Michigan. He taught high school, I don't know, or and in a way, nonfiction's overrated. You know, I mean, I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of wonky policy books about the state of the world. There's so many of those types of books now. Some are not very well written. Are any of them actually terrible? Yeah, actually. Even though there might be information, one of them, they're poorly written because it's not valued. You know, the style isn't valued. What's valued is only content, you know, like what the message. And that's just a backwards way of looking at things. So anyhow, what I'm wearing today, so this is seersucker, the fabric. Now, you might know seersucker. This, see that? That blue and white stripe there? Right, where are we here? Right, yeah, right here. That's a traditional seersucker where it's a very cotton, very cheap cotton cloth. This is almost like paper. But as you can see, seersucker is just a weave in cotton. And so style comes in, and in style, you know, what colors are you going to do? It's not always that medium blue and white. Sometimes it's like my friend Richard here, my late friend Richard Merkin. This too is seersucker. Pink and white. That's from 1998. Same as this. Now I chose this because I wanted something to be kind of dressy, or could be dressy, that almost doubles as a formal type of thing because of its coloration. It's navy, you know, it's dark blue and navy, and the stripes are almost like a solid. And with the trousers that match, you could wear it in the evening. And that's how I've accessorized it today, a little bit more casual. I'm wearing, you know, kind of, this is summer. And so that's the thing about clothing. Yeah, well, that lapel, see, that's my signature. And most of the clothing I have bespoke, I choose the peak lapel rather than the notch lapel. That's just kind of my that's just kind of my thing that I do, you know, because of the angle and everything. And also it's something you do more in custom. It's very hard to find off the peg or off the rack, so that's one of the reasons I do it. So yeah, but what was I going to say about? Oh yeah, seersucker. Oh yeah, plain clothes. So these are kind of all blues and just very plain. So again, I don't like to give advice about dress. I really don't. I mean, I don't even think anybody should really dress like me necessarily. But if I was going to give one piece of advice about clothing, and I think this is only for males, I wouldn't presume to speak about women. I mean, that's a different field, and my response to women's clothing is very much influenced by being heterosexual. So that's going to color a little bit my opinion, and so that might not be worth much, or, you know, it's kind of I call that kind of a special case. I know a little bit about it, but I'm no expert. And of course I like things, but that liking is, you know, biased in a way, I think. But in menswear, I would say try to go for things that are kind of almost nondescript and plain. So instead of a really broad stripe, it's flexibility. Like you can see with this, that's kind of flexible. It's not too strong, but if you have a really loud stripe, you can't put it with stuff. And so the thing is to limit. You want to limit limitation. You want to, you know, have clothes that you can put with a lot of things, and that you don't need a lot of large wardrobe, and you can mix and you can match real easily in simple colors and things like that. I mean, that's kind of my philosophy about that. And so I would never recommend buying a really loud sport coat. and I would stick to very plain colors and things like that. And also to plain colors and plain patterns, or even nondescript patterns, the focus goes to the design and the cut and the craft. And that's actually the most important thing. Actually, it's in the canons of male dress. All experts of men's dress will tell you that the most important aspect of men's clothing is the silhouette. Not the color, not the fabric, and not the style, but the silhouettes by style. That is, the line. Which is totally different than whether it's a check or whether it's a print and all that. So that's just kind of my blurb on. That's all I'm going to say. I've spent too much on that, but I thought it'd be interesting to wear a non-traditional seersucker and show a non-traditional seersucker. That's not the old. There's, the movie Sophie's Choice, that joke about cocksucker. This is only for Sidney Lumet, Sophie's Choice fans. There's that running joke in the film where Sophie, Meryl Streep, gets the word wrong. She says, "I really like your seersucker suit," to the young man because he wears it, and she mistakenly, because she's English second language, calls it cocksucker. I think that's a joke. I remember that film in Sophie's Choice. Sidney Lumet. Now, only Sidney Lumet would have a melodrama like Sophie's Choice, but have a running New York kind of joke among the characters in that film. Have it be that. I mean, that's in the script. That's not necessarily Lumet, but still, it's a Lumet thing. So let's go to Sontag. Too many books, right? So when we last did Sontag, we were talking a lot about what were we talking about? We're talking about her theory of interpretation. Now, her book is called her essay is called Against Interpretation, 1964. Now, against also means right next to, close to. So there's an ambiguity in the very word against. It doesn't necessarily mean oppose. I mean, it does and it doesn't, next to. There's that. And there's all in English. And also there's the question of what she's opposed to. And, she says the revenge of intellect upon art or culture is what she opposes. And she's an intellectual. So what does it mean for a pro? And she's not only intellectual like your host here, I'm not trying to say I'm in Sontag. I'm just saying we're in a similar mindset. Not necessarily not as good as Sontag. I'm just saying that we have a similar worldview. We're both pro-intellectuals. It's not just that we're not anti-intellectual. We think intellect is a good thing. And yet, we also think that there could be a toxic, to use a vogue word of today, use of intellect. That intellect could be a bad thing. If you think about it, anything, even the best of things could be used for bad, used for ill. I mean, we know this. And so when she says that it's a revenge upon art, she's saying that, in that essay, she's saying that the intellect is almost like a god. Aphrodite's love. So let's say intellect is a god. Intellect is a fearful god. It's a god that's afraid of the world and afraid of everything. And it fears new things, and so it wants to analyze, and it wants to, Wordsworth vivisect, right? Because of fear. It's sort of it's almost a spirit of censorship and control. And it's that aspect of intellect that Susan Sontag, the intellectual to end all intellectuals, one of the most intellectual people of the entire 20th century, is inveighing against in that essay. But I want to go to style, because style is everything. And we just saw here with the seersucker, if you just change that one little thing in the stripe. See, if this were like blue and white and it stuck out, it would be more Southern attorney. It would have more associations. I'm not saying it has to, but certain people that aren't as versed in it might look at it and reach certain conclusions about your Gregory Peck and To Kill a Mockingbird. It would have more obvious association just because of that difference of the stripe. Because his stripe looks more like a solid, it's a little dressier, maybe a little more urban, possibly. But these are so. But the fact that we can talk this way about just a damn cloth on a jacket or a coat shows the power of style. And style is in absolutely everything. And the way I'm using the word style, the way she's going to use the word style, it's in life and in art. It's in make-believe, what I call make-believe is my other term, or artifice. And it's in daily life. There's a style to one's kitchen and one's bed and one's pillow, of course, and all that, right? So let's see what she has to say, because I think it's interesting. And I think this essay relates a lot to our podcast. I do have to say, I'm going to get into that a little bit. And also, she's like Jack Driscoll. She's a writer. She's like Marilyn Robinson. She's like Joyce Carol Oates. She's like Joan Didion. She's like Flannery O'Connor. She's just not writing. She's not writing make-believe characters. She's just writing, non-fictional prose. Can non-fictional prose be an art? Can it? Like those folks I just mentioned. In other words, having the virtues of those forms. I'm thinking out loud, maybe the virtue of make-believe itself, or make-belief itself, or artifice itself, or invention itself, while still being factual. And what is the line between fact and, because these are really, people talk about this all the time. Sometimes it gets boring. I think it's interesting, but, what do I know? I don't know. I just want to begin a little here. We'll get to some other things, don't worry. I'm not going to spend. I just think it's really important to go back to. So this photograph is in a style. Her hair is in a style. She's wearing, is that a turtleneck? And she's wearing that coat with the lapel. That's a style, her style. This is a book I just got on the 70s. I'm so excited to get this book. Talks about Werner Erhard and John Lilly and the flotation tank and Esalen. And this is like, look, this book, so in the 70s, so exciting. So I have to thank the Lawn 70s podcast for telling me to get this book. James Riley, Well-Beings. But look at this jacket photo. This is James Riley. That's a style. Now, do you think he's a little bit influenced? I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a difficult... This is 2024, and this is... Where are we here? Oh, yeah, 1964. I think I would like hanging out with her more. Don't mean any offense to James Riley. I'm just saying he's a good writer, though. See, that's another thing, too, is that, this is I'm going to say something. I never talk about current events, but I'm going to right now. It's quite possible that a human being could be the greatest at something they're doing. The greatest at what they were hired to do. And that same human being has things they're not as good at. Like, not everybody's a great public speaker or a great orator. Right? Think of all the things that we all do, 100 things. There are things, do you realize I can't drive a car? I don't drive. You're not going to get me behind the wheel. I'm not supposed to drive. So I'm not going to be working as a driver or a taxi cab driver. It ain't going to happen, right? That's not what I do. But I can talk and I can play the piano a little bit. Those are things I can do. But, I'm just trying to make a point that, this photo looks forbidding. I mean, that's, of course, part of it could be his, his shtick. It's fun, And I look at that, I'm like, well, I don't know. I'll say hi to him because he wrote a book on the 70s. I got to talk to him, right? But the book is wonderful. So I'm not going to this book because of the dude's photograph or because he could carry on a great conversation. I'm going to this book because he did all this about the 1970s. And that's exciting to me, right? And so it's kind of, we've lost a sense as a culture, I think, we've lost a sense of proportion and context, and we don't evaluate things. It's almost like we evaluate things for the wrong reasons, or not the reasons that you know, it's that kind of thing. And we're all, and part of it is, I think, this media culture where everything's appearance, and everything is, you know, I love appearances, you know, appearances are important, but they're not everything, and not everybody is great at appearance. Some people are, that's fine, that's great. And so that's what somebody does. So what I'm saying is that I like Susan Sontag's photo better than James Riley. I even think she's a better writer than James Riley, if I may say so. But she's long gone, and James Riley's with us, and we got to read this. And these are all, of course, opinions, and it's, you know, that's another thing too, is, you know, in art or in life, it's a question of what are you looking for, right? We look for different things, you know. A lot of times we're unaware of what we're looking for. That's unconscious. And so we're guided by these things we're looking for, which is fine. It's fine to have, you know, things that are important to you, right? But we forget that this is this thing, this goal, and we're unaware. And then we, you know, evaluate things in terms of what our priors are and what we're looking for, right? And that's a problem if it doesn't apply. Like, it could be that what you're looking for, you shouldn't be looking for because it's not the place for it, right? Kind of like going into a restaurant and thinking you're going to get a bookstore. I mean, it's a very crude, off-the-cuff example of, you know, misplaced goals. But I think as a culture, we're kind of like that we're going into restaurants and thinking we're going to find a book, and going to a bookstore and asking. We don't know what things are for, and so there's an unconsciousness about it all, and we go to things for inappropriate sense of. I'm just kind of riffing on this because I don't know. It's just my sense of where we are now. And so the inability to evaluate in a better way, in a truthful way, is partly also that we just don't look at things. We get distracted by unimportant things, of course, and sometimes we get distracted, if that's the word, by things that don't matter at all. Or sometimes we don't see if there's excellence in a person, we haven't decided if that excellence is important enough to us, right? Like, let's say somebody's really excellent at something. Like, I can't drive. I can play the piano. Okay, I'm a competent musician. You're not going to get me behind the wheel of a car, but you will get me behind the by piano, right? So that's understandable enough, right? Right. So I'm just thinking out loud. So you want to kind of know what something's for and what you're doing, right? In terms of evaluation. And it's the same with all these things. You know, I get excited about this book about the 70s because I love the 70s so much. Is it true that if I was uninterested in the 70s, I might miss some of the things in here? Possibly. Is it possible that I could overrate this book? Because if it's subject, I hope not. I mean, I think this is going to have some value in it. It's possible, though. I'm certainly... Those are all the sort of self-inventories, I would call. You take an inventory of yourself, you know, becoming less unconscious and aware and all that stuff, part of being human. And I'm talking for far too long, but these are all things that occurred to me today. I don't know why. So, on style. Keep that in mind. You could have good intellect and bad intellect. You know, you can have intellect that, I guess, is fearful of the power of art. Art has power. And the intellect wants to defend against this awesome power. And it is awesome the way the word used to be used. The awe-inspiring power of Milton and Shakespeare and, you know, who knows what else, Jack Driscoll. And so you're faced with that, but, you know, kind of, you're kind of jealous that someone could do something so great. So, of course, you have to tear it down, you know. And maybe there's a little bit of that in the intoxic intellect, right? You can tear it down maybe a little bit. Instead of being generous and you know, so that person accomplished that, you know, don't be afraid to honor If somebody does something great, it's almost like it's a what's the term for that? Zero sum. Yeah, it's a zero sum mentality where somebody else's success or somebody else's excellence necessarily takes away from you or threatens you. What would it be like if we honored people's excellence? What would that look like? I'm not sure we do, by the way, because that's an interesting thing. So it's a little bit like, it's a little bit like, these are philosophic questions. It's a little bit like somebody who's not a great public speaker. There are people who are brilliant minds that just aren't the best orators. Maybe it doesn't matter, is kind of what I'm saying, or maybe, I don't know. There's all kinds of things that go into something. You gotta. So I get end of my polemic here. I had to get my glasses. I'm getting old, so this is the. Get this. All right. Oh wow, the world's totally different. Wow, look at this. This is kind of. I don't know. All right, wow, you can read this now. You ready? It would be hard to find any reputable literary critic today who would care to be caught defending as an idea the old antithesis of style versus content. On this issue, a pious consensus prevails. Everyone is quick to avow that style and content are indissoluble. That the strongly individual style of each important writer is an organic aspect of his work and never something merely decorative, in quotes, quote, decorative, unquote. In the practice of criticism, though, the old antithesis lives on, virtually unassailed. Most of the same critics who disclaim, in passing, the notion that style is an accessory to content maintain the duality whenever they apply themselves to particular works of literature. It is not easy, after all, to get unstuck from a distinction that practically holds together the fabric of critical discourse and serves to perpetuate certain intellectual aims and vested interests, which themselves remain unchallenged and would be difficult to surrender without a fully articulated working replacement at hand. In fact, to talk about the style of a particular novel or poem at all as a, quote, style, unquote, without implying, whether one wishes to or not, that style is merely decorative, accessory, is extremely hard. So she's saying it's actually, we have these bad habits that are, in her view, brought down to us in criticism as a discipline, as a criticism. Henry James said criticism is the highest of all the arts. I actually agree with him. He went on to say that it's the one done most badly, but potential-wise, and so she's saying that there's these habits in criticism. In other words, it doesn't have to be hard. It's because there's a problem in our formulations and how we talk about things, right? So she goes on, merely by employing the notion, one is almost bound to invoke, albeit implicitly, an antithesis between style and something else. Many critics appear not to realize this. They think themselves sufficiently protected by a theoretical disclaimer on the vulgar filtering off of style from content, all the while their judgments continue to reinforce precisely what they are in theory eager to deny. She goes on to talk about many things. I mean, she does a mild criticism, if that's what it is, of, well, I don't know. And she talks about Walt Whitman, the preface of Leaves of Grass, Sartre writing about the stranger. Well, now here's a positive thing from her. She talks about Sartre writing about Albert Camus. And of course, Sartre is a real artist. I mean, he's not just a philosopher; he's a novelist, and he's so Sartre. So this is interesting. Of course, as everyone knows or claims to know, there is no neutral, absolutely transparent style. Jean-Paul Sartre has shown in his excellent review of The Stranger how the celebrated white style, quote, of Camus' novel, impersonal, expository, lucid, flat, is itself the vehicle of Ersatz image of the world, as made up of absurd, fortuitous moments. Now, if you remember that novel, Mother Died Today, or was it yesterday, the famous opening, I think, of The Stranger, Camus, and so that's it. By the way, that's a style that's very influential. I see that in Raymond Carver, of course, that kind of declarative assertions, short declarative assertions. I mean, I'm not assertions, I'm trying to, that's a style. She goes on to say, to speak of style is one way of speaking about the totality of a work of art. Now, I want to cut, it's such a great essay. I hate to go by all this stuff, but I'm going to get to something. This is the Spotlight Telegraph here. I almost want to put this on my tombstone if I'm not cremated. I mean, I don't know. I could, right? And this is what it would say. Here you go. This is how much I like this. The antipathy to style is always antipathy to a given style. There are no stylist works of art. Only works of art belonging to different, more or less complex stylistic traditions and conventions. She goes on to say, long paragraph, this means that the notion of style, generically considered, has a specific historical meaning. So there's always a tradition and a convention. Now, when she's writing this essay, she's hanging out with Jack Smith, one of the most radical filmmakers. Early queer cinema and orgy scenes and Scorpio Rising, Kenneth Anger and The Factory and Warhol. She's interested in very, very extreme works of art of the 60s. I think she probably, Sontag, John Updike was one of her favorite writers, by the way, which is also interesting. I was going to talk about him today, but she's so what I'm suggesting is that her eclecticism, the fact that she's into Kenneth Anger and Scorpio Rising and underground cinema and Jack Smith, but also really likes the much more, you could call him establishment John Updike, or that very eclecticism or ability to evaluate different things and embrace different things is actually comes out of the thing I just read. She approaches reality with an awareness of there's always a given style. Because once you realize there's a given style, there's opportunity to enter into it and learn from it. Maybe even make it your own. Now, I should say there's styles I do not like. I rarely talk about them. Or there are styles that overwhelmingly, in other words, there are styles that I like maybe 5% of the style. That is examples of that style, and most of it I do not like. And there's a lot of things like that. And some of those styles are quite beloved in the world, And that's just a thing. But, if I have a guest on this podcast and they do that style that I don't like, for the sake of that duration of that 1 hour, I'm going to embrace that art object and actually embrace that style and attempt as much as I can. Put aside my dislike, put aside my indifference or hostility and antipathy and try to say, well, what is in this of value? Just like I changed my mind about abstract painting. Remember, I didn't used to like abstract painting when I first encountered it. And then I grew to love it through standing in front of Franz Klein and de Kooning and Frank Stella and Rauschenberg and on and Mark Rothko, you know, and trying to. And then eventually I came to it, or it came to me over time. Some things like when I first heard Oscar Peterson, I loved him. It was just immediate. I don't know. Some things are like that. It doesn't. By the way, if you immediately love something, it doesn't mean that that's better than something else. Just because something is slow to be appreciated or comes later, makes it neither superior or inferior. Those are just different. A lot of it has to do with just I think different. I think levels of what I would call density. There's very dense artwork. Mark Edmonds says Shakespeare's is well, it's not Mark Edmonds' theory, it's Dick Poirier's theory about Shakespeare, and that there's dense and there's difficult. And dense things are just approachable. They're the things that on the surface are easy. Like popular things, like Oscar Peterson maybe is accessible. Very accessible. In that sense, Oscar Peterson is dense. So in Poirier's formulation, the difficult stuff or the complexity is underneath the accessible. So it's like there's a big wide open door, you can enter into it. But there are more things there if you care to look at it. But I guess what Poirier would say is that those other things that are very rich and complex that are there, there's a long gateway to that, but you don't necessarily have to get that to like it. It's almost like it's a little bit like I think kind of a little bit of additional quality. And Poirier and I think Edmondson, actually met Mark Edmondson a long time ago when he wrote that book, Why Read? I think he's on the dream list, I don't know. I think he nominated Shakespeare as an example. He says, my children love Shakespeare. My 4 and 5-year-old, he had 2 kids, and it's because he thought Shakespeare was dense and not difficult. And I guess maybe the music of Schoenberg is difficult, or maybe Sontag is difficult. I don't know. It's a crude binary, and I don't really believe in it necessarily, of course, but it's an interesting way to think about things that are more approachable or less approachable. Right. So I thought it'd be fun to look at things in terms of style a little bit. So I brought up these old yearbooks. I don't know. Understand that with yearbooks, we're talking about direct reality, not art. Some would say that this is now this is interesting. J.G. Ballard calls it invisible literature, things that aren't art that are really, or things that aren't literature things that aren't literature that you could choose to see as literature, like the phone book. Style is the broadest sense of all consciousness is consistent. Personality, yeah, that's right. Yeah, Quentin Crisp wrote an interesting book on. I know that book. I had that book. I think it's in the 80s. That's right, Peter. Well, he was very. Well, I don't want to get too far off. So I show these yearbooks. But thank you. That's. I saw the English civil service. I saw the servant. I'm trying to remember. Did John Hurt do that on the stage before the Naked Civil Servant, before the film? He might have, and I might have seen him on stage. Actually, it's one of the many. I've seen many productions, and that would have been you too. Yeah, I saw John Hurt in that as a little kid. That's all. I'm gonna write posts on my theater going experience. It's a whole. There's a whole. I've seen a lot of productions, and that's one of them. Anyway, where are we here? This is a 1970s yearbook. It was my yearbook, and there's me by name. So I was 10 years old. I wanted to get away from this heavy prose and this Susan Sontag and even Jack Driscoll, rest in peace. I want to get away from these more excellent things and get to something a little more prosaic, or like these yearbooks, you know. Picking up Ballard's idea of invisible literature. So now, look at this. This is the treasure chest. So somebody drew this. So this is my point. This is in a style. Now, this principal here in that awful plaid jacket, the guy with the glasses, he's next to the guy that looks like David Hartman. He was an awful principal, abusive. He would have you come. I was only in this school for 1 year, but he would have kids come into his office and he would paddle you. And I don't really remember the reasons why he had paddle. Very kind of like a military academy, almost like a Southern military. I mean, it was like a prep school. And I mean, but you know what's funny? The thing about style is that, see, there's that principal who was like almost like he went to Oral Roberts University or something, or was a coach, you know. But then you have the faculty. I want you to see this dude here. There's this dude right here. There he is. See that dude with the shirt and the disco and the woman next to him? So you get a sense that at the school in Tampa, the 70s, that some of these teachers, you think some of these teachers are getting down when they're not. I just have a feeling. I just know. This is the thing. So there's the different aspects of school. You know, so that's the thing. Same year. Same year, a different school for children. Same city. This is a conservative prep school. This is a free school. Independent school. Look at that, what they chose for their cover. This is almost like a Rod McEwen, you know, like one of those, this is the beginning of the first day of the rest of your life type of thing. Same year, 70s. You want to see the principal of this school? I don't think there's a picture of me. There is a picture of my first girlfriend in here, Lydia. I think she's in here. I don't know why I'm not in here. I think it's because, again, I changed schools a lot. And so I wasn't there. They didn't have a photo of me, but they did have a photo of the principal. So bear with me here. I'll find a picture for me from that year in the other book, I think. Why can't I find the principal? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Shoot. Here we go. It was worth the wait. Rod Highsmith, teacher feature. First of all, it says teacher feature. And there's the headmaster, Rod. Now look at Rod Highsmith. Think about the fact that this is a headmaster. And this is a headmaster. Same year, 1977. So one of the reasons people say, Mitch, why do you like the 70s so much? I think the 70s, so the fact that these were two schools in the same city, yeah, exactly. But it was the same year. So there's like these little kids got to do this thing. We painted this teacher's van. Imagine your class project is to paint a teacher's van. That's very... Well, I don't know. It's kind of a different thing. Rod Highsmith. By the way, Rod Highsmith never came to school. He came 3 times. He's the headmaster. And parents would write complaints about the fact he just would not show up. And they would say, it's just like, that's a whole other. But I only illustrate that for levity and sort of fun. Just to say that these schools are in a style. These yearbooks are in a style. You know? Style. that principal decided to show up to work like that. Yes, they are. Oh yeah, there's a lot of Wes Anderson. Yeah, well, you know what's funny? Here's another picture of Highsmith. Look at him standing. There he is. There. I'm not good at. Yeah, there. Doesn't he look like? He looks like, I don't know. He's just sort of like a guy working at the Tampa Chamber of Commerce. Some kind of a, I don't know, just not a guy you'd, but he would get out the paddle and he would paddle you. Strange guy. Strange guy. Just God, I don't know. Yearbooks. So I want to reflect a little bit on the fact that these are, so if schools come in styles and teachers come in styles, there was the disco teacher with the shirt open. You know, he was the phys ed teacher, I guess, or something. And some styles have beards, and some styles have no beard, clean shaven. Right? This cup has a style. I'm wearing my shirt open because it's summer, you know, and it's 90 degrees out and sort of a different, you know, these are all decisions, right? And they're styles. So I guess the only thing I'd want to say, kind of like how we evaluate people, places, and things, that we want to evaluate in the right spirit of what's being asked for, what matters. You know, some things matter more than other things, and we might be confused about what matters. Or we might not really look at the heart of something, I think, perhaps. We want to think that everything comes in a style. Just everything, you know? And this is real life. So when we get to make-believe, when we get to novels and TV shows and poems, and the naked civil servant, which John heard on the stage, I saw him on stage, you know, sort of invented things, it becomes even more vexed and complex because you're talking about imagination. It's not real life in that sense. And that's really interesting because oftentimes, as we all know, people get more emotional and argumentative about invented, imagined things. I think probably because it's invented, you're like, well, if you can make it up any way you want, the onus is on you to make it up in a way that's appealing to us, right? It's like, you know, direct reality can't help, you know. And so a little bit, there's a commonsensical reason why people get very worked up about make-believe, about art, right? And maybe that's the reason. I happen to think that's not a legitimate reason for being emotional in that way about art, even though there's a logic to it. Because the logic is that, well, you can make up anything, but, you know, people make up things for all sorts of reasons, you know. And they make things in the way that they do for all sorts of reasons, you know, and you want to do a little more inquiry. So that's kind of my spirit of this episode, I think. And so style, we're going to continue to talk about style. And I read some nonfiction. I'm going to read a little bit of fiction, I think. I don't know. Just to get a sense. Maybe we can read some Jack Driscoll. We'll try to find some, a little bit. Gotta find it first. Where are we here? Damn. Bear with me. Jack Driscoll, where are you? He'll always be with us. Spiritually, when people go, they go physically, and this is the case, by the way, even when they don't leave anything behind physical. A part of them, of course, is always a trace of them. And when they write books, there's even more of a trace of them, you know, clearly. Let me find this here. I'm just going to read the opening of this novel and see how we feel about it, right? Where are we here? Yeah. All right. This is from a novel called Lucky Man, Lucky Woman. Lucky Man, Lucky Woman. It's the name of the novel. It was written in the 90s. So Jack Driscoll, this is for you. We're going to read your opening of your novel, Lucky Man, Lucky Woman. Here we go. I remember him in class. He would Always wore parachute pants, camouflage. I remember that when I ran into, I did meet Sting, Gordon Sumner, in the same era. He was doing. Actually, I met Sting. I met Jeremy. No, it was Jeremy Irons. So I was watching a matinee of. I don't remember what play, and Jeremy Irons was in the outside in his parachute pants. It must have been big in the '80s, kind of green. Anyhow, Jack Driscoll would wear those same pants. Michigan, you know. All right, here we go. Perry LaFond wakes early, though he's the one who stayed up late, reading the underlined section in Marcia's portable Nietzsche, an old college text he found while rummaging the bookshelf for something to help his insomnia. He reaches down now and picks up the book from the floor and rereads that same passage he thought about while finally drifting off to sleep. Quote, "When marrying, one should ask oneself this question. Do you believe that you will be able to converse well with this woman into your old age? Everything else in marriage is transitory." Unquote. Lately, Perry and Marcia had been arguing much too often, followed by hours of the silent treatment, each avoiding the other in the apartment, and each refusing to be the first to speak, as though whoever does has lost some slight but essential edge. He's determined to ease up, to stop swooping down on her. He hopes the change of scenery will help. They are both covered to the waist by a pinstripe blue and white LL Bean flannel sheet. Marcia's naked underneath. Perry is certain of this without even looking. If she were to lift the edge, because Marcia has turned on her side during the night, her legs tucked up, and is facing away from him toward the open window, he would see the needle tracks on her backside. There's barely enough light, but there is enough. He's the one who put them there, injecting her for 12 consecutive mornings with Pergonal, delivered. Marcia's obstetrician, a fertility expert, explained to them from the urine of postmenopausal Italian nuns. Unquote. Almost no medical talk surprises Perry anymore. Lazy sperm or borrowed grade A eggs or zygotes in the fallopian tubes. Buddy wondered, losing eye contact with this doctor and then staring at the detailed blue and red diagram of a woman's reproductive organs behind plexiglass on the wall, who it was who asked those nuns, celibate their entire lives, to pee for this purpose in a jar. He couldn't and cannot now imagine them consenting. And yet he has consented to injecting Marcia, who hates shots, at $150 a whack, paid for by Betty Benoit, Marcia's mother, who has the money and believes, as she often says, that God's delays are not necessarily denials, unquote. Amen, Marcia's twin sister Pauline said to that. Amen. Perry has never gotten used to Betty's handouts. Maybe I do sound like a broken record, he's insisted over the years to Marcia, but I hate sponging like this. It's never felt right to me. The handouts started before they were even married. Perry agreeing to let Marcia help pay his grad school expenses at Trinity. She referred to it as an investment in their future. So you have the opening of this novel about a fertility problem and nuns and a marriage, and it's from this husband's point of view, and that's how his novel opens. Now that's fictional prose. That is I just want to say, see, that's, I don't ever want to live in a world in which somebody doesn't write something like that in that exact manner as an account, in that, that value in that, and that's a mode of writing. You can call it literature, you call it fiction, we can, but it's got its own integrity, and is thoroughly different than this Sontag thing about art and definitions and criticism and the history of criticism. It's an entirely different mode of prose, equally valuable. But this is something that only fiction, gives you. And that's all I want to say for today. Yearbooks and prose and Jack Driscoll, who I had for Man's Search for Meaning, and reading Ralph Ellison, Kurt Vonnegut Jr., and Ken Kesey. That was a year. So thank you, and subscribe to our Patreon if you can. And I have some music stuff coming up. Next month I'm doing piano, almost like a piano recital. Christine Moore, the vocalist, has a big event tonight in New York City. If you're in New York, go to St. Peter's Church. She's doing Spanish song and Arabic song. And I think they're streaming. Really great vocalist. And she's going to be on our podcast next month. And it was really a joy to talk with her. She talked to, because we both went to music school, thank you. And we went to music school at the same time, and she was in the classical world, serious classical, and I was in the jazz world. So it's really fun to talk about those days in music. And that's a world unto itself, like Jack Driscoll's novel. And these are all different parts of art and parts of culture, right? And so on this podcast, we're going to talk about as much of them as we can. So thank you. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.